Carlton King, the former Scotland Yard Special Branch and MI6 officer and the author of Black Ops.
I was undercover for Special Branch in a jihadi organisation.
My name is Carlton King, and welcome to the Black Spy Podcast, the show that shines a light on the world of secret intelligence, national security, and armed governmental personal protection operations, but actually looks at geopolitics in the round. Today's episode is part 2 of an episode that I started last week. Don't take that order. So he said, don't take that order. All I ask of you is, if you see me make an order like that and you don't take that particular order, because I want you to follow my orders when I give them to you. This is what he's saying to him. I want you to follow my orders. And he's expressive when he's saying it. But he says, don't take such an order. I just want you to tell me, when I've cooled down, what orders you didn't put in place that I told you to. So you see, what position does that put a guy in? Because he knows he gets a job because of the president. He knows that to retain the job, he's got to carry out what the president's asking him to do. But he's asked by the president to make decisions as to which of these orders that apparently are outlandish that he should not take on board. Now that's recorded. That is recorded, so we know he said that. So the question is this the case with Trump? I would suggest to you that Trump, if he gives an order, wants it carried out. I would suggest to you that he's not like Nixon saying, I could make a mistake. Because I think that one of his great mentors drilled into him, never be wrong. You know, if you look at the Art of the Deal, one of his great mentors, Cohen, he was called the guy, never be wrong. Always stand by what you've done. And if it is wrong, you argue your way out that it wasn't wrong. You know, be strong. Blah, 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 blah. Which is why some people say a mafia boss. You know, they talk to him like that. Which is why he utilises every angle of power which he has in his hands. He's utilising. So, it'll take a strong person to turn around and say, no, I'm not doing that. And Tulsi Gabbard, look, I used to think she was very, very good. I thought she was an extremely capable. But you can see that she has been muted by the president. He don't even listen to her. He's not thrown her off the roll. He just has sidetracked her as the head of intelligence of the United States. Right? She's just been sidetracked. Right? And I imagine that's what you can do with anybody. So therefore, the people who want to retain power, who want to stay in the role, who want to maybe build for their future, probably just do what he says. And those guys and gals in the military, and there's one military officer who has kicked back against Hegseth, who is just carrying out those orders as well, because he's, down with the man himself. One of them turned around and said, no, not having it, right? Resigned. But the others he's just getting rid of. But this is a black guy, so he would have just got rid of him anyway. Because, of course, he is now whitening the US military forces. Which, as I said before to you, is a problem, taking into account that a large number of people in the US military are black. And then you've got Hispanics, who not necessarily the closest bedfellows with blacks, but some Hispanics are obviously black as well. Or of mixed race. So, you could, if you start getting rid of people of colour, and then on top of that, women, you can give yourself a big problem in the US military. Because you can have a lot of people who will turn around and say, this guy's not for me. So therefore, I'm not going to resign, but I'm going to sort of soft pedal his orders. So you see, there's a whole host of nuances you get when an individual is so boisterous and can't can't see a way out of things, can't take a way out that in any way, shape or means looks as though he's back down. You could find a reason out for it because they call him, some say taco, don't they? Trump always chickens out. But of course, the damage is already done 9 times out of 10 by the time he does that. And then he finds some way out by stipulating whatever it might be. So let's take Venezuela. We're going to take the country. No, you didn't. You just got rid of one leader, and you probably paid, or the CIA did on your behalf, paid tens of millions of dollars to various peoples to basically be bribed to stand down when they got rid of Maduro. So that's the way it can be done, and then Trump can stalk up a victory. It's another victory for me. I got rid of this fella, blah, 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 blah. But going back to Truth Social, I mean, the picture of him as Christ. You would have thought that when that picture came out and some people questioned that picture, and then the Pope, who is an American, questioned that picture in a very clear but roundabout way. So anybody listening to what he said, it was clear that he was saying that it was egregious, that he was using Christianity for his own means, etc., etc. That said, when he did say that, instead of being quiet even, taking that one on the chin, no, he comes out swinging, calls the fella useless, and attacks him. See, this is what I'm saying. Starmer, good example. Starmer kind of finds himself in a position because he wants to be the number one ally of the United States, because frankly that's all we've got since we've left the European Union. So he wants that because we're totally dependent. If we want a world role, and I don't see why we do, to be fair, but if we do want to hold on to a world role and pretend we're still the empire, then of course you want to hold on to the coattails of any United States president. So therefore, what does he do? He has a problem. And he even turns around himself and says, I've been taking massive pressure. Well, why should that be pressure to you? It's because the United States president wants you to do something. You're an independent country, aren't you? Because if you're not, then it's pressure. If you are, it ain't any pressure because you're independent. But we know we are not independent. So therefore, it's pressure. So he then basically says, you cannot use UK bases to carry out these attacks on Iran, which are clearly illegal, should never have happened, etc., etc. However, in order to try and backtrack off that, he basically says we'll use them to defend our own areas and defend our sovereign base in Cyprus and to defend our allies in the Middle East. So, in a way, he allows the United States to fly out of some of our so-called RAF bases, and backtracks on the original sentiment, right? Backtracks on it. And so therefore, he thinks, I've won some brownie points. No! Trump says, you are a chicken shit. Excuse my language again. This is all Trumpian language I'm using, so sorry for my language. You're a chicken shit. We asked you for an aircraft carrier. You said, no, you're useless. So actually, next time when you need us, we won't be there. Right? That's what he basically says. Now, some other countries that kept the powder dry, kept their mouth shut whilst doing it, he hasn't attacked them. Right? He hasn't attacked them. No, that isn't to say that Trump hasn't seen that they haven't aided and assisted, but he hasn't attacked them. Now, the Italians came out openly because they had to. The moment that the Pope was spoken negatively to, and had to go on the attack of Trump. And it's caused Meloni a problem in Italy. Prime Minister of Italy. Caused her a problem. So, again, the French, who weren't giving anything, they kind of backtracked slightly, but then started paying for oil. So again, they have taken a hit and been looked at negatively. Now, what he did want to keep in power was you liked Orban in Hungary and wanted to keep him in power. So he sent Vance there to speak on behalf of Orban. Now, the reality of that situation is he's actually much stronger than what it appears. A lot of the MAGA people liked Orban because he has that same, if you will, tinge of white supremacy, as well as just look after our own people, our own Hungarians, get rid of all foreigners, etc., etc. So he had that tinge. So a lot of MAGA people like that. So he sends Vance. Now, the question is, why would he send Vance if Orban was going to win? I think he knew the high likelihood was, and he did know, by the way, because the polls were saying it, that Orban would lose. The guy who won, heavily supported by George Soros. And therefore then, Vance takes the hit for it. Do you see what I'm saying? This is how this politics plays in. So yes, Trump may well be problematic, he is, but he's not there alone, is what I'm kind of saying. And I just wanted to highlight to you how the dirty game of politics fits into the dirty game of intelligence. Even though I believe, as an intelligence officer and a national security officer, that the reason why I was doing things was for a good reason. But what I do know is that the wrong president can utilise you to be dirty on their behalf. And that's the problem sometimes of intel, particularly when your organisation works to government and government then set the parameters of what they want getting. So that's the Central Intelligence Agency example. This is what we want to happen, says the White House. And the Central Intelligence Agency's job is to make that happen. To some extent, that's the same with us in SIS, the MI6, where the government says these are our priorities, and so therefore work to those priorities. Okay? So that's how intelligence agencies, as opposed to security agencies and police agencies, can fall directly afoul of what a government's doing. Don't get me wrong, the other two elements, police intelligence and what I mean by that is police secret intelligence, working in the national security field, and a national security agency like the security service MI5, who have no powers but have the role of defending the realm rather than upholding the peace of the monarch. In this case, the king's peace is what the special branch used to do in the police. So they too can fall foul because government gives them directives, and if the leader isn't strong, the directives can be carried out, and the people who get hit when it goes wrong are the people who carried out the directives, because they turn around and said, well, we want them to do something, but we didn't want them to do that. Because politicians, look, they never take the can for anything. So they're always looking to slide away. No matter what the score is, they're always looking to slide away. You know, note now that in the vetting process, you'll find that the Prime Minister's going to turn around and say, everybody other than him knew that the vetting process for Mandelson had gone wrong. But he never knew. So it must be down to the civil service, not down to him, right? No, I don't know. I wasn't there. But what I'm saying is that that's what a politician will always do. Very rare will you have any politician who put his hand in and say, well, yeah, I did it, I knew it, and I took the gamble, and we put Mandelson in, and Mandelson was the wrong guy. No, there's no points in that. Why would you? They don't do that. That's not what politicians do. They turn around and say, I didn't know that. I was told when he passed his SC, this is what they're trying to say now. When he passed his SC, security check, that's all that is, a security check, right? Look, a security check is something that a school assistant gets so they can work with children. If you were going to put a person in a job like that and you want them to be able to see all the information that comes from the United States, from the agencies, etc., and our agencies going into them, they need developed vetting like what I had. And developed vetting is very strict and very strong, and it looks into everything and all your background. Well, Mandy had that, and it said that came back and said, no, we can't use him because he's failed his developed vetting, which he would do because on more than one occasion he's been found wanting in fiscal matters and in other matters potentially. So therefore, he's fallen foul of developed vetting. Okay? So therefore, that rule required it, supposedly, and therefore somebody overruled that and said, no, it's sufficient that you just looked at him in a cursory way. That's what the Prime Minister's trying to say. He was never told that he failed that. Well, if not, I've got to ask myself a question. I'm the Prime Minister. This is the number one post. You know, we say and I've just outlined to you how important the role is as the ambassador to America now, because that's all we've got that puts us on the world stage, right? Europe's gone, and with that, with Europe going, a lot of the Commonwealth who used to hang around because of entry into Europe via the United Kingdom are now not as interested anymore. So all that role is gone, right? All of it's gone. So the only role that we really have that we think that we can make some difference in, and the rest of the world might look at us with some sort of envy, is by being very, very close to our English-speaking cousins. And so therefore, the guy who you put into that role, the guy or gal who's going to take that role over, you want to be able to be very capable, loyal, and not have any, what should I say, any skeletons in his background, you know, in terms of that vetting can pick up. Everybody's got some problem, but in terms that vetting can pick up, right? And you're telling me you never asked the question? Questionable. Anyway, so be it. The point I'm making with this whole of today's episode is that a ruler who is wanton, a ruler who falls foul of what your country supposedly, even though we know it wasn't, supposedly stood for and undermines all of that, is crass, is undiplomatic, is basically too thin-skinned to take any type of criticism, is in some way, shape or means, and I'm not going to give it all of the fancy medical terminology that you hear people say about President Trump, because frankly I'm not a medic, so I can't give those positions. All I'm going to say is too thin-skinned to take criticism or to say that he was ever wrong, has got a problem, and that leader will drag you down. And I'll tell you something else, as I said to you before. Agencies, foreign agencies, will have assessed him, will have had doctors assessing him from afar, will be looking at all the words and everything he says, and will be going back to their agencies. It'll probably be the external agency generally that's running this, and then back to their leads and saying, this is our analysis of this individual. So where it gets dangerous is that I can guess that both the Chinese and the Russians example say, we are not certain what this guy will do. Right? We cannot assess him. He's dangerous. He jumps from one side to the other in moments. He's got mood swings. We don't know if one day we will wake up and we've got missiles coming over to us because this guy has thought, now I can catch them when they're not watching. This is the danger. So this is more than semantics, ladies and gentlemen. This is the danger of you not showing, if you will, a steady hand to the world. Because other leaders question where you actually sit on that, if you will, that the final analysis, if you will, on the movement towards warfare. Be that economic warfare or be that military warfare. because the economic warfare for many a country is just as important. Because if an individual is willing to undermine the economy of another country by working against your country and utilizing the powers that they have at hand that allows them to, if you will, undermine your economy fully, then that's problematic. So this is why I'm going to split this into two, because I think I have to touch on the economic aspect. China actually is in a very powerful position vis-a-vis the United States because it holds a lot of the United States bonds. It holds a lot of the United States monetary valuation in its hands. It has been, for the last several months, slowly but surely selling those bonds, etc. Those financial instruments, those fiscal instruments. It's been getting rid of them. But it could sink the US just by getting rid of them all at once. Now, that's no good to China because it will lose dimes on the dollar or of whatever it gets rid of. If people see there's a run on the US treasuries and the US fiscal instruments. So it can't just get rid of them like that. But when you get Besson, as he did today, just today, start talking about how they're going to start sanctioning Chinese companies for taking oil which is the lifeline of Chinese industry, being, as we all know, China being, if you will, the industrial power for the world, the workshop of the world, we used to give that title to the United Kingdom, then that is actually a threat to China. So this is what I'm saying. A clever administration would be figuring all this out and wondering where they can go without rumbling the feathers of China, because why would you want to test the forthrightness, capacity, willingness to take you on? You wouldn't. They've done that with Iran, and Iran has given them a hell of a bloody nose. Because the United States is understanding that the industrial capacity of the United States, particularly the fiscal industrial capacity, but I'm using that word. So, where you cite example, your massive systems that allow the United States to be Silicon Valley #1, where you cite those, and a lot of those are cited in the Middle East, a lot of areas whereby they have, because it's cheap for some of the bigger companies, whereby you have your data mining systems, right? Well, if you've got no energy, how do you run them? Ask you that question, how do you run them? Add to that, as I've said in a previous program, so I don't want to go over it, the utility of the petrodollar going, because whereas these countries buy, everybody bought the oil in dollars, and then what did these countries do? These small Gulf states, they actually threw that money around the world, oftentimes a lot of it within the United States, and because it's the dollars they are using, and bought up slaves of the United States. Well, if you've no longer got that flowing into the United States, what is holding the dollar up? Right? So Iran saw all of this and has utilised that. For people not understanding, they're not just blowing stuff up willy-nilly. They're utilising that to hit back at the United States and, to a lesser degree, Israel. Because Israel's issue is not trying to, if you will, prevent industrial capacity of Iran. Israel's point of view is dead simple, and it's it's a point of view that you can see from the neighbouring countries. You want to keep the neighbouring countries at war with each other. So you want revolution, you want people fighting, rioting in all the countries that surround you, because that retains weakness in those countries. And if your fear is, true or not, that these countries may come and attack us someday, well, you nigh on a given if you're attacking them, but let's say someday, that you need to keep those countries fighting each other. So the perspective for Israel in Iran is dead simple. Don't sue for peace. Actually make that country ungovernable by a central power. Make that country split as they did with Iraq. Make it split into 3, make it split into 5. You know, what would you have? You'd have the Baluch, you'd have the Kurds, you'd have the Uzbeks, you'd have, you could break that country up into many, many different areas, in addition to the Persians or Iranians. So that's how Israel's perspective would be. Split it up. Make it Syria-esque. Make it like Syria. Everybody fighting everybody else, so therefore they are no threat. Right? Make it like Lebanon. Fight each other, so there is no threat. Right? So that's what you want to attain. That's not in the interests of the United States, though. Because for the United States, one can argue that you want an Iran that orientates itself, like the Shah did, to the USA. Right? You don't want it in bits and baps, fighting each other. To be fair, that's not advantageous to us either. Because if people are mourning now at refugees, how much more will they mourn in Europe when 50 million of the 90 million people in Iran leave? It won't be 50 million, let's say it's 20 million. Leave because they're in dire civil war. And they're all fighting each other and killing each other, and families can't get in. And the nearest place they're going to jump to is to Europe. Now, I'll hear some ill-informed people say, well, why would they not go to Arab countries? Well, number one, Iranians aren't Arabs. Right? So that's the first thing. Right? They're not Arabs. They don't speak Arabic. They speak Farsi. And for them, they would probably look and say, I'll go to Britain, who's had a connection with us. Britain ran Iran for a while. You've got to remember all these things. This is the problem of empire. Right? So you'll have that. There were nice connections with France. So a lot of them might knock off to France. There were big connections just before the Second World War with the Germans. So a lot of them might jump off to Germany. And you could go on and on and on. So this is where people will end up. Right? Because Trump won't let anybody in. So Trump would have had that created with the Israeli, will have created it, but he won't take the people in. So the people are going to be brought into Europe. Right? So it's not to Europe's advantage either to have this war, and definitely not to have Iran break up and split, as it is to the advantage of Israel. So I guess what I'm saying to you is, why is it to the advantage of Trump for this? And when I look at that, I really can't see that it is. And the other side of that coin then is, forget all of whose advantage or whatever else, why is it even thinkable that third parties should turn around to Iran and say, you can't have a nuclear weapon? Why? I mean, we state loud and clear, the nuclear weapon, we say, I don't believe it by the way, but we say it, that the nuclear weapon has kept us safe for the last 70 years. Because otherwise, I don't know who this person or who this country might be, but some mythical enemy might have come and attacked us. Truth of the matter is, who would that enemy be? If we weren't meddling other people's interests, there'd be nobody who'd have interest in us to attack us. First and foremost, because they'd have to go through quite a few countries to get to us. So why would one try to attack the rest of us? I mean, if you take Russia, which is the big argument people talk about, it's total nonsense. Why would they? There is no advantage for it. None whatsoever. There's advantage in selling goods to us, advantage in selling oil and etc., whatever else they've got coming out of the ground. Yeah, there is an advantage there, but there is no advantage in taking the country over. It's nonsense. It's silly talk, right? Total utter nonsense. So we have a nuclear weapon saying we have it because of this protection. The reality is, of course, that we can't use that nuclear weapon without the US say so, because our nuclear weapon isn't independent, unlike the French's. The French foster frappe, as they call it, theirs is an independent nuclear system. Ours is an American system, which we have to ask the Americans in order to fire it, because they have the coordinates, etc. Even our submarines, which fire them, have to be looked after by the American, because again, without the American, we can't fire them from our subs. Right? So it's not independent at all in reality, but we like to say we do have it, and that's why I've always said it's a waste of money, because if we were going to do it with anywhere and we wanted to beef up the military, I'd be beefing up our helicopters, I'd be beefing up our general military hardware. Look, I saw it in both Afghanistan and Iraq, where I was there forever and a day. I was always there every month nigh on. I was in either Afghanistan or Iraq, and I saw the woeful lack of kit which we had available to us. Right? You can't use the nuclear stuff, you can't use it. But you know, if we're going to talk about why can we have some veto on whether Iranians have nuclear? You know, and don't give me this old chestnut, oh, the nutters, they'd fire it off. Right, that's exactly the same thing you said about the North Koreans. Right? Now they've got a nuclear weapon, who says anything? I repeat that, now they have nuclear weapons, who's talking about North Korea firing off nuclear weapons? Who's talking about invading North Korea, which is the reason why you would fire them off, because you were getting invaded, right? But nobody's talking about invading them anymore because they got nuclear weapons. So nobody wants to invade them. Why? Because they can defend themselves. You know, if you didn't learn it before, you learnt from Gaddafi giving up, and he didn't even have a nuclear weapon, he had the potential to build one. But what it happened is, because he didn't have one, because he was open, revolution was created in his land after Western powers bombed his country for 50 days. They would never have done that had he have had nuclear weapons. Never even considered doing that, because every one of them would have felt to himself, hang on, he can fire back at us. And Gaddafi may well have done it, which, to be fair, if you bombed the United States, they'd fire a nuclear weapon back at you as soon as look at you as well. So where is the difference? And supposedly we would. Supposedly, if somebody fires off a Reshnik to us, what do we fire back at? A Reshnik is not nuclear, by the way, so I'm using that. So the Russians fire off a Reshnik to us and blow up, let's say, Swiss Cottage. What do we fire back at? What's our capability? Right? The argument is we'd go nuclear. Right? So how is that any different than Iran? Because they're under a threat. Constant threat from Israel. Constant. Every Prime Minister of the United States has been asked by the Israelis to carry out attacks on Iran. Every Prime Minister. Not the other way around. Iran hasn't been attacking Israel. It's been saying to them, we want them attacked. It's killed their scientists around the world, not just in, let's say, well, not because they don't go to Israel, but around the world they've been killing them. And in Iran. When peace was on hand, they've stopped peace on 3 different occasions by blowing up the peace negotiators. So you could argue that a nuclear weapon is something that they should have. Now, why haven't they got one then? People are going to say to me. Well, they didn't have one for the pure simple reason that the previous leader, who was meant to be some mad dog, has said we won't do that because they are disgusting weapons. In a fatwa, you can read it. They are disgusting weapons which do not differentiate between civilians and military. And they kill a whole load of civilians, which obviously is correct, because that's what nuclear weapons do. Right? In fact, that was one of the things that people got down on Jeremy Corbyn about, because he said he wouldn't use them because of what they are. Because they are basically, as he would put it, they basically are weapons of not just mass destruction, but also weapons of war crimes. They can't be anything else because you're killing civilians en masse and it's not targeted. So that's what he said. And he was said to be, oh, he's used as he's a child and understand the world, blah, 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 blah. Whatever you think of him, he was articulate in what he said. You know, I won't use weapons of mass destruction that kill civilians willy-nilly. So if it came to it, I wouldn't use them. Right? So why is he a mad dog for saying that he wouldn't, but we're saying the Iranians are mad dogs for saying that they will when their leader said they'd never create them in the first place? Right, so where are we now? Now we're at the situation whereby the son of the previous ruler, whose father was assassinated, whose mother was assassinated, whose wife was assassinated, whose daughter was assassinated, whose sister was assassinated, right? That guy is supposed to come into power and sit down with President Trump and say, you know what, I won't have nuclear weapons. He's an idiot if he does that. Surely you'd look and say to yourself, hang on, what's happened to North Korea? Nothing. Nothing. Why? Because they've got the weapon of last resort. Because they know they will destroy anybody who does what they've just done to my family, never mind the other thousands of Iranians. You know, that's a powerful, powerful motivator to get nuclear weapons, not to have them. And this is the whole nonsensical perspective of the war. And this is, I suggest, why Trump can't find a way out to stand down. Because surely somebody's going to bring that up. Now, don't get me wrong, we've been complicit in the Western press of not bringing such issues up. We don't bring it up. But surely somebody's going to bring it up. And his antennae can probably see that. So he thinks, I've got to win via strength. So his strength is, let's throw our military out and let's, as he said, you know, destroy a whole civilization. Who sounds mad there? Destroy a whole civilization. He said, bomb them back to the Stone Age. Now, the average man on the street using that language, fair enough, you can get away with it. It's sad, and you just turn around and say that person is ignorant. But when a ruler uses that language, you've got to ask yourself a question. Is the ruler sane? Well, if nothing else, he's not showing the diplomatic decorum which is required in the role of leader. So anyway, look, I've been through it. I've looked at basically many different areas that come off this perspective of true social. And I think that true social gets Trump into a lot of problems that others have to find a way out of. But the problem being, in trying to find a way out of it for others, is that they're fearful of not carrying out his orders of the true social. So there you have this sort of Teufelskreis, this deadly circle, whereby you're looking at a man who says, I want this, this and this to happen, when he wakes up after having 2 hours sleep on a Monday night, right? Reinforces it more so after another 2 hours sleep, maybe changes his mind in the morning and says, well, I'm meaning, well, because they've done this, I'll be lenient with him and we'll do that. But other world leaders look at it and think, hang on, was this bloke real when he's saying this? Does he really mean that? So they're on edge and wondering, what's the score? Right? Then you get a position whereby if somebody says you're taco, he reinforces to show he's not taco and then says, no, I'm going to blow you to Stone Age. I will sort you out. I'll make you know. I shouldn't try and do accents because I'm terrible at it. Right? So they do that. So he has to keep, if you will, upping the stake to show he's macho. So as I said before, maybe it is something as simple as, in our book, which, as I said, you can get from Amazon, The Male Menopause, The Hidden Crisis. Maybe it is something as simple as the male menopause and he doesn't want to look to be pushed down in any way, shape or means. He wants to show he's strong. Maybe it's a much more Trump-orientated characteristic that the experts in this field could give, great Latin titles to. Or maybe it's just that he's been outmanoeuvred in every role. Or maybe it's that the puppet masters are pulling his strings because for them, who knows, because the Epstein crisis, the Epstein intelligence that was gained by being an agent has provided information on Trump, Trump's wife, maybe even Trump's children, okay? And therefore, his room for manoeuvre is not as great as it might have been had he not been tied up in this situation of blackmail. Now, I don't know there's blackmail. I don't know. All I know is that they say that the references to Trump within the papers that they've given out have often been redacted. So there's probably more. Look, enough's come out on the internet if you read it. Enough's come out. Enough allegations. And they're only allegations. You can only ever say allegations because, until they're proven, I'm a great believer in proof. They're just allegations. But these allegations have come out and they're bad enough if they're true. Yeah. Because they're just allegations. Right? But maybe that stops his manoeuvrability. Who knows? All I'd say is that he's in a very dangerous situation, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll leave you with this, actually. Consider where we are now. Consider how Trump is doubling down. Yes, we're in a moment right now of ceasefire. But I will put to you my belief that this is a moment, frankly, just for Trump to, if you will, reinvigorate the US forces who've used up a lot of the missiles, etc., and to put them back in play at a later date, which I would imagine was in the next couple of weeks, maybe even sooner, back into war play. And if they don't, mark my words, Israeli attacks will come about that will cause Trump to have to come back. Because one thing we do know, and we're not saying it, this is what Marco Rubio said, the Secretary of State, Foreign Secretary to us, of the United States. He said we had to attack Iran because we knew Israel was going to attack them. And if Israel attacked them, the retaliation, but he didn't use the word retaliation, he said that this is what makes me laugh. It would be retaliation for anybody else, but because it's Iran, Iran would then attack our forces. He didn't say they'd be retaliating against an attack on them. He said they'd be attacking our forces and we'd lose men and we'd have to turn around to you and you'd say, why didn't you do something? Well, the something was dead simple. Say to the state of Israel, do not fire any weapons. Because we've given you those weapons, and if you fire them, you get nothing from us ever again, and we don't support you when the Iranians come back at you. Right? No, never said. What his argument is, all we could do is double down and unleash hell on Iran. Now, if that makes sense to you, I'll leave you with that. Good night, ladies and gentlemen, and hopefully you'll listen to me again next week.
Here is a working class spy telling his stories, the secrets, the lives of spies. Feel free to message Carlton King on all socials and give this show 5 stars on Apple iTunes and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. For your ears only.
I was a member of Her Majesty's Secret Intelligence Service.